My name is Marina. I'm 38 years old, and for 5 long years I was trapped in a narcissist relationship that destroyed me in ways I never thought possible. This is my narcissist true story. He didn't just break my heart. He emptied my bank account. He stripped away my dignity. And he convinced everyone around me that I was the liar, that I was the unstable one. Nobody believed my true story. The betrayal was so deep that sometimes I still wonder if I will ever be able to trust another human being again. It's hard to even put into words the psychological abuse, the financial control, the invisible prison I was living in. But I need to tell it, because silence is exactly what a narcissist wants from you. In the beginning, there were no bruises, no screaming matches that outsiders could point to as signs of abuse. No, the first violences were invisible. They crept into my life like a fog, slowly clouding everything I believed about myself. I thought I was strong, independent, capable. I had a career, I had savings, I had plans for my future. But when you're living with a narcissist, nothing remains yours for long. The emotional abuse started in whispers, in subtle criticisms disguised as jokes. He would look at the way I dressed and say, "That's cute, but don't you think it's a bit desperate for your age?" Or if I shared an idea, he'd roll his eyes and tell me I was overthinking, as usual. Little by little, these comments chipped away at me, and the silence. God, the silence was even worse. If I dared to disagree with him, he would punish me not with yelling, but with days of cold distance. He would walk past me in the house as if I didn't exist. He would sit on the couch scrolling on his phone while I sat beside him, begging for acknowledgement, for a single word. That's the kind of narcissist control that doesn't leave a scar you can show to anyone, but it cuts you just the same. I started apologizing for things I hadn't even done, just to end the silence. That was the first layer of the prison. I learned to fear his withdrawal more than I feared conflict itself. I remember one night so clearly. I had gotten a small bonus at work, and I was proud of myself. I mentioned it at dinner, thinking he would be happy for me. Instead, he put down his fork, smirked, and said, "Well, don't get too excited. You know you're not really good with money." That was the first time he planted the seed that I was incapable of managing my own finances. At the time, I brushed it off. But looking back, I see how carefully he laid the groundwork for what was to come. Complete financial abuse and betrayal. He was preparing me to hand over control without even realizing it. The gaslighting came next, and it was relentless. He lied so easily, so smoothly, that I began to question my own memory. When I noticed withdrawals from our joint account that I didn't recognize, he would say, "You authorized that. Don't you remember?" And when I swore I hadn't, he would laugh and shake his head, muttering, "You really need to get your memory checked." That's how narcissist manipulation works. You start doubting your own mind. I began keeping notes, writing down dates and amounts. But even then, he found ways to twist reality. Those are old charges. Banks take time to process. You're being paranoid. It became a daily gaslighting story, and I felt like I was losing my grip on what was real. The cruelest part wasn't even what he did. It was how he made others believe I was the unstable one. Friends I confided in would say, "Are you sure? He seemed so caring." He had everyone fooled. He would post smiling photos of us on social media, compliment me in public, play the role of the perfect partner, and behind closed doors, he was emptying my bank account and telling me I was crazy for noticing. That duality is part of every toxic relationship with a narcissist. They wear a mask so convincing that when you tell the truth, nobody believes you. That's the ultimate humiliation. The escalation came when he no longer bothered to hide his contempt. I will never forget the day I tried to confront him after discovering a huge withdrawal. It was thousands of dollars, my entire savings for a trip I had been planning for years. When I confronted him, shaking, he laughed in my face. "Oh, Marina, you're pathetic. You act like this money is really yours. Do you forget who pays the bills around here?" But that was a lie. Half the bills were mine, always had been. He twisted everything until I felt powerless. And then he said the words that still echo in my nightmares. "You're nothing without me. No one would believe your little sob story." That was the moment I knew I was in an invisible prison, trapped by a narcissist who had complete control not only of my finances, but of my reality. So why did I stay? That's the question everyone asks. The answer is layered with fear and shame. I stayed because I was ashamed to admit how much I had lost, how much I had allowed him to take from me. I stayed because I thought maybe I could fix it. Maybe if I loved him harder, he would change. I stayed because he convinced me that no one else would ever want me, that I was too broken, too dependent. That's how psychological abuse works. You don't see the chains, but they're there, binding you tighter every day. My invisible prison was built from lies, from manipulation, from the constant humiliation that left me too weak to run. And now, looking back, I can barely recognize the woman I was. I tell this narcissist confession not because I am healed, but because I need to speak the truth that was denied to me for so long. He emptied my bank account, but worse, he emptied me. He hollowed out my confidence, my independence, my sense of self. This is my narcissist's true story, and it is not finished, because the trauma doesn't vanish when the relationship ends. The betrayal lives in me. The fear and shame still cling to me. But I know one thing: I don't want to be broken anymore. He only loved me when I was powerless, and I refuse to live powerless again. After he emptied my bank account, I felt stripped bare, like I had been robbed not just of money, but of my very identity. Money represented freedom, independence, the ability to leave if I needed to. And suddenly, it was gone. I remember staring at the banking app on my phone, my hands trembling, my chest so tight I could hardly breathe. Every cent I had saved over years of hard work had vanished. I confronted him again, desperate, my voice breaking, and he looked at me with that calm, cruel smile that only a narcissist can wear. "You're overreacting, Marina. I used the money for us. Stop making a scene." That word, us, cut deeper than a knife, because there was no us. It was always him, always his needs, his wants, his control. This wasn't partnership. It was narcissist control disguised as love. But when I tried to explain this to my family, to my friends, their responses shattered me even more. "Are you sure?" they asked. "He seems so responsible." Nobody believed my true story. It became another layer of emotional abuse, this time not just from him, but from the disbelief of those I loved. The humiliation of not being believed added to the invisible prison he had built around me. The gaslighting grew worse after that. He would taunt me with contradictions. One day he'd insist the money was never mine to begin with. The next day he'd claim I had given him permission. And then he'd say I was making up the whole thing, that I was too obsessed with money, too paranoid, too unstable. "Do you hear yourself?" he'd ask, his tone dripping with mockery. "You sound insane." That's the sickening brilliance of narcissist manipulation. They make you feel crazy for noticing their abuse. My own memories felt like lies. My reality became a battlefield where I was always losing. I started questioning not just him, but myself. Was I exaggerating? Was I too sensitive? Maybe I had agreed without realizing. Maybe I had forgotten. I kept replaying conversations in my head, desperate for proof, but his voice was louder than mine. He told me I was forgetful, careless, irresponsible. Eventually, I believed him. That's what it means to be trapped by a narcissist. You stop trusting yourself. And then came the escalation, the public humiliation that stripped away any last shred of confidence I had. One evening, we were out with friends, and the topic of money came up casually. Without hesitation, he laughed and said, "Oh, Marina, she's hopeless with finances. She'd be bankrupt in a week if it weren't for me." Everyone laughed with him. I forced a smile, but inside, I was collapsing. He had stolen everything from me, and yet he painted me as the irresponsible one. That was the cruelty of his lies and betrayal. Not only did he take my savings, he stole my reputation too. After that night, I began withdrawing from my own friends. I didn't want to face their laughter, their subtle glances of pity. That was his plan all along. Narcissist isolation. The less support I had, the more dependent I became on him. He isolated me not by locking me in a room, but by poisoning the way others saw me. Every toxic relationship has its own flavor of destruction, and mine tasted like shame. In private, his words were sharper, more vicious. "You're worthless without me. No man would ever put up with you. If I leave, you'll have nothing." Each insult was a stone added to the invisible prison walls, and I believed him. He had destroyed my finances, undermined my credibility, and eroded my self-worth until escape seemed impossible. Fear and shame became my daily companions. But perhaps the most twisted part of this narcissist's true story was the way he would occasionally show tenderness, fake tenderness. a manipulative softness that always came right after the worst attacks. After he screamed that I was nothing, he would hold me the next day and say, "I'm only hard on you because I love you. I want you to be better." That's the cycle of emotional abuse, cruelty followed by crumbs of affection. It's how he kept me tied to him even as I drowned. I stayed because I thought maybe he was right. Maybe I was the problem. Maybe I was too sensitive, too reckless, too needy. I stayed because the fear of starting over with nothing felt more terrifying than staying in the hell I already knew. That's what an invisible prison feels like. You don't see bars, but every decision is controlled by fear, shame, and manipulation. At night, I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, calculating how long it would take me to rebuild if I left. I had nothing, not a cent to my name, because he had taken it all. He controlled the accounts, the bills, the narrative, and yet I still stayed. I still hoped. That is the twisted logic of trauma. You cling to the very person who is destroying you because you believe escape is impossible. Even now, as I confess this, I feel the weight of those years pressing on me. He didn't just steal money. He stole years of my life, pieces of my soul, fragments of my identity. He made me live a gaslighting story so convincing that I doubted every breath I took. This is not just financial abuse. It is psychological abuse, emotional abuse, narcissist betrayal at its cruelest form. I don't have a happy ending for you. This isn't a survival story wrapped in a neat bow. It's a narcissist confession, raw and unfinished. The trauma still lingers. The fear and shame still whisper in my ear at night. But I share this because silence keeps women trapped. Because there are others out there right now, sitting in the dark, wondering if they're crazy, wondering if anyone will believe them. And to them, I say, I know what it feels like. I lived with a narcissist. I was trapped by his lies, his control, his humiliation. He emptied my bank account, but worse, he emptied me. And yet, somewhere deep inside, I still believe I am worth more than his cruelty. I still believe I can rebuild. He only loved me when I was broken. But I refuse to stay broken. There is something I need to confess that I never said out loud to anyone until now. After he emptied my bank account, I didn't just feel poor. I felt stripped of my identity. I had always defined myself as a woman who worked hard, who provided for herself, who had a safety net. Losing that money wasn't just about the financial abuse. It was about the humiliation of having to admit that everything I had built could be taken from me in one swipe, with a single act of narcissist betrayal. And what made it unbearable was that nobody believed me. Friends thought I was exaggerating, family thought I was dramatic, and he encouraged that disbelief. He crafted the narrative so carefully. He was the responsible partner, and I was the unstable one. Living with a narcissist is like living in two parallel worlds. In one world, the public world, he played the role of the charming, caring man. He opened doors for me in front of others. He complimented me at dinners. He told people I was the love of his life, and everyone clapped, smiled, admired. In the other world, the private world, he was draining my soul drop by drop, controlling every aspect of my life, destroying my finances, mocking my intelligence, humiliating me in ways I couldn't even put into words. That duality is the cruelest part of a toxic relationship. The mask is so perfect that when you tell your truth, you sound like the liar. The gaslighting became my daily reality. He made me question not just the money, but everything. If I said he had promised something, he'd laugh and say, "You imagine things all the time." If I caught him in a lie, he would flip it around and say, "You're the one lying. You make up stories when you don't get your way." The manipulation was so constant, so insidious, that eventually I lost my ability to trust my own memory. I started doubting even my feelings. Was I too sensitive? Was I making him out to be worse than he was? Maybe it was me. Maybe I was broken, and he was the only one who would put up with me. That's how narcissist manipulation works. It doesn't just distort reality, it steals your confidence in your own perception of reality. The financial abuse was his favorite weapon because it gave him tangible control. He would hide bills from me, then suddenly throw them in my face and accuse me of being careless. He once looked me straight in the eyes and said, "You don't even know how to survive without me." And part of me believed him, because after he emptied my bank account, I truly didn't know how I would survive. That is what makes financial abuse one of the most dangerous forms of psychological abuse. It creates dependency. He wasn't just controlling my emotions. He was controlling whether or not I could even feed myself, whether I could leave, whether I could start over. That was the invisible prison in its purest form. There was a night I will never forget. We were at a family gathering, and someone casually asked when we would take a vacation. I smiled nervously and said, "Well, maybe next year, after I save up again." Before I could even finish, he cut me off with a cruel laugh. "Save? She doesn't save. She spends everything. I'm the one who has to manage the money." Everyone laughed. Everyone nodded. And I sat there with a burning face, unable to defend myself without sounding like the bitter, crazy girlfriend. He had robbed me blind, and yet he painted me as the irresponsible one. That humiliation dug so deep that even now, years later, I feel the sting. Slowly, I stopped sharing anything with anyone. I was too embarrassed, too afraid of being dismissed again. That's how narcissist isolation works. It doesn't always come from being locked away, but from being silenced by shame. I stopped calling friends. I stopped visiting family. Every time I thought of telling the truth, his words echoed in my head. "No one will believe you." And he was right. They didn't. That silence was my prison. The escalation of abuse wasn't just financial. He controlled everything. What I wore, how I spoke, even how I laughed. One evening, I laughed too loudly at a movie and he snapped, "God, you're embarrassing. Can't you be normal for once?" I shrank into myself, ashamed of something as natural as laughter. Another time, I bought a cheap lipstick, nothing extravagant, and he looked at me with disgust and said, "Why are you wasting money on nonsense? You'll never be beautiful enough for that to matter." Those words cut deeper than any knife. That was humiliation, pure and sharp. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about erasing me as a woman, as a person. And yet, I stayed. That's the hardest part to explain, even to myself. I stayed because he had convinced me that I was worthless on my own. I stayed because I had no money, no support, no energy to fight. I stayed because I was afraid of leaving with nothing, afraid of starting over, afraid of being completely alone. Fear and shame were the shackles of my invisible prison. I was trapped by a narcissist who didn't need physical locks or chains. He used my own insecurities as weapons against me. Some nights, when the house was quiet, I would lie awake and dream of running away. I would imagine packing a small bag, disappearing, starting fresh somewhere new. But then the fear would come crashing back. How could I survive with nothing? Where would I go? Who would believe me? The fantasy would collapse into despair, and I would roll over, close my eyes, and accept another day of humiliation. That is what it means to be living with a narcissist. Hope flickers, but fear always wins. I lost track of myself in those years. I stopped recognizing the woman in the mirror. My eyes looked dull, my shoulders hunched, my smile gone. The vibrant, independent woman I had once been had vanished. In her place was someone small, fragile, dependent, someone who apologized constantly, someone who tiptoed around the man she loved, someone who lived in constant fear of the next attack. That's what narcissist abuse does. It doesn't just hurt you, it rewrites you. When I look back now, I realize that my true prison wasn't just his control, it was my belief in his lies. He told me I was nothing without him, and I believed him. He told me no one would ever love me, and I believed him. He told me I couldn't survive alone, and I believed him. That is the deepest wound of all, the way a narcissist can make you betray yourself. And so, this is my narcissist confession. I stayed in a toxic love that wasn't love at all. I lived a gaslighting story that broke my mind. I endured lies and betrayal that emptied not just my bank account, but my soul. I became a prisoner in an invisible prison built out of fear, shame, humiliation, and manipulation. But I am here, speaking it now, because I need to. Because silence is the most dangerous part of this abuse. He thrived in my silence. He thrived in the disbelief of others. He thrived in the shadows where no one could see the truth. And if I stay silent, he still wins. So I tell this not because I have healed, but because I am still healing. I tell this not because I am free, but because I am still finding my way out of the invisible chains. I tell this because maybe, somewhere, another woman is living the same nightmare, and she needs to hear that she's not crazy, that she's not alone, that what she feels is real. He emptied my bank account, but worse, he emptied me. He left me hollow, ashamed, afraid. And yet, I whisper to myself in the dark, I am still here, I am still breathing, and I will not let him own my story anymore. He only loved me when I was powerless, but I refuse to live powerless again. There are moments that stay burned into your memory forever, and with him, those moments are like scars on my skin that no one else can see. Even after 5 years of living with a narcissist, even after the financial abuse, the lies, the gaslighting, the humiliation, I kept thinking maybe it was me, maybe I was broken, and maybe he was right to control me. That's how deep the manipulation went. That's how cruel narcissist abuse is. It doesn't just crush you, it convinces you that you deserve to be crushed. The final straw wasn't dramatic. There was no shouting, no violence, no sudden revelation. It was quiet, almost ordinary. I came home one evening after work, exhausted, and I found a letter on the kitchen table. It was from the bank, another overdraft notice. My stomach twisted as I opened it, my hands shaking. He had taken more money, not just from savings this time, but from credit cards under my name. I felt sick, and when I confronted him, he shrugged and said, "You should be grateful I handle these things. You'd be lost without me." Something in me broke that night, not loudly, not visibly, but silently, like a crack spreading through glass. I realized that no matter how much I gave, he would always take more. I realized that this wasn't love, it was a prison built out of control, humiliation, isolation, lies, and betrayal. He had emptied my bank account, but worse, he had emptied me. And still, I stayed, because the invisible chains of fear and shame were stronger than any lock. The isolation was complete by then. I had no friends left who would listen, no family who believed me. Everyone saw him as the stable one, the charming one, the responsible one. To them, my words sounded like bitterness, like exaggeration. That's the cruel genius of narcissist control. They make sure no one else sees the monster they really are. And so I stopped talking. I stopped reaching out. My world became smaller and smaller until it was only him and the walls of my invisible prison. The psychological abuse left wounds that no one can see. He had a way of speaking that made me feel like a child. "You don't know what you're doing. You can't survive without me. You're lucky I even put up with you." Words that became my reality. I stopped believing in myself, stopped believing in my own strength. That's what it means to be trapped by a narcissist. Your world shrinks until it fits inside the palm of their hand, and you forget what freedom even looks like. I can't count how many nights I cried myself to sleep, silently, so he wouldn't hear. The tears were for the money I lost, yes, but also for the pieces of myself I could no longer find. My laughter, my independence, my confidence. All gone, stolen by his manipulation, his cruelty, his relentless need for control. It was like he fed on my weakness, like the more he broke me, the stronger he felt. People often ask survivors why they stayed. The truth is never simple. I stayed because of fear. Fear of being alone. Fear of starting over with nothing. Fear of not being believed. I stayed because of shame. Shame that I had let him take everything. Shame that I had ignored the red flags. Shame that I wasn't strong enough to leave. And I stayed because of hope. The cruelest hope of all. That maybe one day he would change. That maybe the man I first met would come back. That's the trap of toxic love. You hold on to a ghost that never really existed. Even now, outside of it, I struggled to explain what it felt like. It was like drowning slowly, every day a little more, while everyone else on the shore told me the water wasn't that deep. That disbelief hurt almost as much as his abuse. Nobody believed my true story, and that disbelief kept me trapped longer than I want to admit. There is no happy ending here. I don't have my money back. I don't have my old self back. I don't have closure. What I have is silence and memories that haunt me. What I have is trauma that wakes me in the middle of the night, reminding me of the invisible prison I lived in for 5 years. What I have is the bitter taste of betrayal that never seems to fade. But I also have this. My voice. My confession. My truth. For so long, he controlled the narrative. For so long, he convinced everyone, including me, that I was the problem. But this is my narcissist confession. and it belongs to me. He cannot silence me anymore. I don't tell this story for sympathy. I don't tell it because I've healed. I tell it because silence protects narcissists. Silence keeps women trapped. Silence allows financial abuse, psychological abuse, and narcissist manipulation to continue unchecked. And I refuse to stay silent anymore. He emptied my bank account. He emptied my soul. He left me isolated and humiliated. But he didn't destroy me completely, because I am still here. I am scarred. I am broken. I am afraid. But I am here, and maybe that's enough for now. This is my narcissist true story, my emotional abuse story, my gaslighting story, my story of lies and betrayal, of humiliation and control, of fear and shame. It is a story of living with a narcissist, of being trapped by a narcissist, of being silenced and dismissed and isolated. It is not a story of victory, but it is a story of survival. He only loved me when I was broken, but I am learning, slowly, painfully, that I don't want to be broken anymore.